kiss for you.
So I banned the market for a controller here, just trying to figure out one that works best for me. I had been using an Xbox controller for a bit for PC specifically, but now that I am at a point where I can have an actual setup for my Switch and it's docked with a TV and all that, I've been looking for a controller that can pair seamlessly with both my PC and my Switch. And I had recently learned that the controller I had been using, my 8BitDo Ultimate 2C, controller for PC does not work natively with the Switch. I would have to buy a separate adapter and then plug the dongle into that and have to transfer the dongle back and forth, which I did not want to do. So in the effort of trying to find a controller that works best for PC and Switch seamlessly, I figured out that that's actually quite a bit harder than one might expect. So I decided to buy 3 of them pretty much and test them out and test out which ones I like best and make a review of it here. So we're going to be going over the kind of pros and cons of them real quick, and then I'll go into more of like an unboxing, impressions, and then show some gameplay, right, with the controller and a controller cam. So the 3 controllers I ended up kind of settling on for this thing were the Flydigi Vader 5 Pro, GameSir G7 Pro 8K, and the Manba One V2. Each of these seamlessly connect to both PC and Switch with a toggle on the back. That's all you have to do, right? Just toggle on the back, go to the Switch thing, connect them, and you're all good, and you can seamlessly switch between them. You don't have to move a dongle around, don't have to do all this stuff, right? It just works. So because of that, these were the 3 best ones that I could find that were able to do that. But they do obviously have their pros and cons, starting with the Flydigi. Now, unfortunately, the Flydigi was the one that I eliminated very quickly for 2 reasons, which we'll get into, but let's go over the main things here. So the Flydigi's standout feature is the stick tension. This is the ability to change your sticks here from a 40 gram to an 80 gram, and I believe I have a thing here. If we just open this up, I have a little chart here that shows everything. So you can see the force flex joysticks, which allow the changeable tension. It's the same thing with the triggers, tension, and everything else, and that is kind of the main feature set of this, is the ability to shift and change that with the little ring there. Same thing applies to the triggers. 2 extra face buttons, as you can see here, if you want extra buttons there. A gyro support, native Switch and iOS usability, which is what I was looking for. Kind of the neutral elements of this is that it does still use a relatively old Hall effect stick solution. The software for it is, hit or miss in terms of the quality of it and connections and things. And it does have a lot of buttons. There's 2 buttons here, 2 on the front, and 4 paddles, which for my use case is quite excessive, but I put that in a neutral category. The detriments to this and why I ultimately decided against this for what I'm doing here. And the reason I mention that is because most of the video is going to be spent on the next 2 options, and the reason I kind of avoided Flydigi Vader 5 here. They are using an older first-gen Hall effect stuff, right? This is the same technology that is in my 8BitDo Ultimate controller. However, the 8BitDo one's like $30, and this Flydigi one is, a lot more expensive. So I was like, okay, that doesn't feel like it's worth it to have the same kind of technology for a substantially higher price. It only comes in like black or white, less of a concern, but definitely a point. There were some reliability concerns early on the back paddles and the centering of the sticks, and some concerns about, it not drifting, but, not necessarily being as secure as you would want them to be. The biggest reason that I ultimately decided against it was the fact that, they have the older tech for more money, and that the charging dock, was an extra $20. And so at that point, with the controller being $80, you were looking at basically $95 to $100 for this controller. And I pretty much looked at that and I was like, you know what? This controller is the most expensive of the lineup here, and it has the most limited feature set other than the stick tension, which I decided at the time that I wasn't necessarily going to be able to use. So I just said, okay, let me try it out. Let me, see if there's anything here worth it. But I ultimately decided a couple days ago that it wasn't, and I returned it. So you'll not be seeing a bunch of stuff like that. The next one here, however, is a little more relevant. So we'll just move that. The next one is the GameSir G7 Pro 8K. Now, I do want to make a little bit of a mention here that only the 8K version, which came out a couple months back, is compatible with the native Switch and iOS functions, right? The previous ones here were not. And the reason for that is because the previous G7 Pro was an officially licensed Xbox controller, so it did not have the compatibility with Switch and iOS that you would expect, right? This one it does not have to deal with that because it's not a Xbox licensed controller, so it can connect to Switch no problem. This controller was quite interesting because it has the new TMR sticks as well as the 2.0 GameSir 2.0 version of those sticks, so the highest quality and most recent sticks and feature set there available. Obviously, by its name, it has 8K polling, which we'll get into and kind of the value of that if there is any. It has a swappable D-pad, so a concern from the previous G7 Pro was the quality of the D-pad, the kind of looseness of it and stuff. This 8K version has the improved D-pad from the version 2 of the G7 Pro, and I believe it's also improved since that version as well, so it's like the best version of the D-pad, and it comes in multiple sections. As you can see, the default is this circle, but it comes with a standard D-pad and kind of like an Xbox style one. As I mentioned, really critical, it has that native Switch and iOS stuff. It has a PS4 mode. Importantly, this does not mean usable on PS4, but what it does mean is that if you connect it to a PC, you will have the DualShock, rumble, and the gyro and stuff compatibility there if you want it. So this does not necessarily mean it's usable on PS4. It does mean it will pretend to be a DualShock when you connect it to PC. Rubber grips on the back, help for stability, also has gyro. Important for this one, it includes the charging dock, which you can see here and you'll be able to see later in the footage. Some neutral elements for this one. Unfortunately, as currently stands, this is only available in collab colors, which I put as both a neutral and a negative. What that means is that you've seen the Aim Labs version, maybe of this controller with the blue Aim Labs branding, transparent plastic. That is one version. There's also a Neo 3 version that obviously has Neo 3 branding, and this one is the Champion Edition. I decided that the Champion Edition has the least amount of branding, just in terms of how it looks, right? Like there is a little signature on the bottom right there, but overall it's a pretty neutral branding, and so I thought that was probably the best one. But unfortunately, there is not a normal like white or black version, at least so far, of this controller, so you'll have to keep that in mind. And the other thing, obviously, is the software. Even though the GameSir Connect software is pretty good, you still have to download third-party accessory software in order to use the controller. For negatives, there's not a ton here other than the fact that it only comes in those collab editions. It is ultimately still a G7 Pro, so if you did not like the G7 Pro for whatever reason, whether it be the D-pad, although that is improved, whether it be, general things about how it feels to use for you personally, that's still going to be a problem. This is not a magically different new device. It's still based on the G7 Pro. So if you had issues with that before, then you may not like this. The other thing that is slight detriment is that it is the most expensive one here, just on a base level at $90, but as mentioned, it does include the dock, and it is using the most up-to-date hardware, so I would ultimately say that for that price, this is a pretty good deal in the sense that, it's not the Switch 2 Pro controller, which only works on Switch and is $90 and has old potentiometer sticks, right? This is, you're paying a decent amount, but you're also getting the dock, you're getting gyro, you're getting that D-pad, the improved sticks, right? This is a very advanced controller for that price point. So let's move on now to the final here. So the final controller we are taking a look at is the Manba One. And the Manba One is a, seemingly, as you would see by the screen on the controller, you may say that that's a gimmick. And while I've been testing this controller for a little bit, I will say that the screen is absolutely useful for what it's providing, which is the fact that there is not a software suite or a software thing for this. Everything you need for the software is on the controller itself. This includes dead zones and macros and pairing and modes and tension, and vibration and colors and everything like that, right? Everything, all the software is included on the device itself, so you do not have to open up a device, clutter your space with that. Everything works on the screen, and thus it is also immediate. Once you save it, it goes immediately. You don't have to wait for it, unpair it, that kind of thing. Has gyro, has the 2 extra paddles on the back for 4 paddles on the back, has a removable faceplate for interchangeability, obviously has that important native compatibility layer, also includes a dock. It is a little bit of a larger dock compared to the GameSir one, but it does include that dock, and I would say it's also relatively priced competitively with something like a DualSense controller at $70 US. The kind of neutral things, it is still using that older generation Hall effect, which I don't like the Flydigi having. However, I would say that this does at least justify its use for it, because this is a little bit of an older controller. In 2024, the original came out versus the Vader 5 Pro, which came out a couple months ago, right? So the fact that, this is using an older version of Hall Effect is at least more understandable because it's an older controller compared to the Flydigi one, which is a much newer controller, still using the old setup, but it is still kind of, annoying. And also the RGB. So it can be turned off. I have it turned off currently as you're seeing it. You can enable it, all that stuff, but it is kind of a neutral thing. If you don't like RGB on it or don't like wasting light or whatever, it's there. It can be disabled, but it is definitely a neutral point. Points against it, as mentioned, the old Hall Effect stuff. It's a relatively large controller, even though it doesn't feel that much different, like dimension-wise, to an Xbox controller. It feels quite a bit bulkier for whatever reason, and so for my small hands, that doesn't necessarily work that well, but for a lot of other people, it could definitely be more of an improvement. The button feel is definitely a thing I think will take getting used to. That is mostly because the D-pad is quite stiff on purpose. It's kind of more of a stiffer than a clicky D-pad. The buttons, on the other hand, are extra clicky and don't have a ton of travel to them. They're quite a bit more, twitch or reactionary than your typical membrane style, so that may take getting used to. And obviously the layout, because you don't have your start, stop, and other buttons at the top because the screen is there, has to go at the bottom underneath the D-pad and right joystick. So that could be a little bit annoying if you're not used to that. But overall, those are mostly preference complaints. For me, the button feel and the layout were a problem, but for you getting this controller, it may not be a problem because you're used to this, or you have larger hands, or it's not a problem for you. So just keep that in mind. So overall, those were kind of the things and the pros and cons list I made quickly on these controllers. And as after this point, you'll be seeing, my unboxing of at least the Manba and the GameSir, and showcasing what it comes with, as well as the feel and stuff. So as you'll be able to see on the screen now, I'm unboxing the Manba One, and the Manba is an interesting unboxing. So there's two versions of the package. There's the older style, like plastic one where you can see through the housing, and that is now gone. That is the previous version 1, and the version 2 here is just a normal black box, right? You take it out, get all your stuff, relatively normal accessory suite. You get the dock, as I mentioned. The controller itself is quite big. Again, it is not necessarily bigger than any of the other controllers, but it feels quite dense, and that works for a lot of people that maybe have, larger hands or just like the density of the controller. But for me, that's neither here or there. What other thing you'll notice about the controller is just generally, obviously the screen's going to come on, it's going to show up all your stuff. But the other thing you notice is actually that the triggers are a lot shorter than most triggers would be. I think they're more similar to PlayStation triggers in the sense that they're like, half the size of what a Xbox One would be. They kind of stop a little bit short. And you'll also notice the back paddle buttons there are also quite a bit shorter. They're in the kind of like 2x2 instead of just two giant panels on the back and some extra buttons up front like the Flydigi does. It is using this other format that, again, depending on how you grip the controller, will be either a benefit to you or a drawback. The other thing I noticed early on was, again, the clickiness of the face buttons and the fact that they just kind of happen immediately. They're a lot clickier than I was used to. And then for me, that wasn't necessarily a benefit, but again, for you, that you could like that, right? That could be a thing you were hoping for. Otherwise, the controller is pretty simple. You have a see-through faceplate. The black version does not have that. It's just full black, so it looks a lot more normal. So if you don't want this kind of like bolted-on plastic look, then you do not have to do that. There is a black version of it. As said by the side, there's the Manba logo on the side there. Light up if you want. Triggers, all that stuff. USB-C port in the front. Your charging dock there that kind of just cradles into it and all that. You can see the motors here for the vibration. Overall, I quite like the design, even if it's not necessarily my take or the best thing that fits in my hand. I do still like the design of this controller overall. Turning on the screen, as you'll see, it starts to connect and you'll see the Manba logo pop up. The first thing you're going to want to do is plug it in, although I don't think you need to plug it in. It recommends plugging it in for the first time just to get a connection, and then you can use the included dongle, the white one. But first off, you'll get to the main screen here, and the first thing I'll ask you to do other than reconnect is to press the home button for 3 seconds. So you'll do that, you'll press the home button, and then you'll get access to the main menu. And this main menu has a bunch of things. It has pairing, a mode option, a settings option, display more, and help. The first thing you're going to want to do is go to mode option and click start. The start and back buttons are the ones that work, the face buttons do not. And you're going to want to make sure you click on PC and then do receiver, and that will pair it to the PC. And obviously when you go to your other devices, you'll go there to change that, hit back, and then you'll go to settings. This is where you get all your options for configuration. There is 3 configs and a switch config, which is very nice. You simply click into it, and then you can check things like buttons, joystick, trigger, and vibration. For buttons, you can configure every single button, A, B, X, Y, L, B, L, T, R, B, R, T, as well as the 4 macro buttons, and assign macros directly in the interface there by just pressing on them and then doing start. The important thing to know is that these are a bunch more than I believe the GameSir one offers, which is only 3 buttons. You can have as many buttons as will fit on the controller. However, you know, the usability of that will depend on the game. For joystick, you can go in there, you have things like curve and dead zone, and you can adjust the curve and dead zone there. Go back, you have triggers, you can again do the dead zone and the trigger stroke, and vibration is a simple up and down. And then on here, a relatively simple menu navigation, which is also quite quick. You have display, and display has brightness, LED colors, LED modes that you can go through. And then you have more, and the more just has languages calibration. And there's a button testing thing, which is very nice. You don't have to do a separate thing like that. Help just gives you a QR code for the user manual, and then obviously at the top you have pair, and that selects the pairing thing, which will pair it to a different controller if you want it to. So that is that, and that works pretty well. There's also an on-off button at the back, I believe, so if you don't, you ever forget if your controls are on or off, you just press that button and there it goes. So that is pretty much an overview of the controller and how it's functioning there. I think overall that works pretty well. I'm pretty happy with how the screen operates, and it doesn't really get in the way of most of the usability. So we're going to do the next part where I'm going to be talking about the controller usability and the control functions as I'm using it, right? My impressions of it. So as I mentioned, kind of in the pros and cons block, there is some things about this controller that I ultimately do not like, and it is the fact that it feels bulky for my hands. The buttons, the face buttons feel very clicky and a little bit too clicky for what I'm trying to do with them. The D-pad's a bit stiff. I don't love the shoulder buttons here. They're kind of too aligned with the other side of the plastic here, and it doesn't feel great to press them. The triggers have a bit too much wood, like the wood feeling stop. They don't feel like membrane back. They feel kind of just like they go into plastic, which doesn't feel great. And the back paddles are pretty good for the most part, but again, hitting those upper 2 there are a little bit harder. And so overall, while I was satisfied with the performance of the controller when I was playing, in this case, you'll be seeing both Borderlands 4 for shooter and Fatal Fury. Obviously, important to know, I guess, or a point to note, is that I don't play shooters with controllers, like ever. But I wanted to try because I was getting these controllers. I did want to see how functional they will be for shooters. So I did want to try a relatively low stakes option and see how it feels, right? See how the aim assist is, see how controlling it is. And while I was able to do well and kind of get my sensitivity checked out in Borderlands 4, it definitely was a feeling experience, and one that I don't think I would recommend if you're used to playing with a mouse and keyboard, right? I also wasn't able to test gyro because Borderlands 4, for whatever reason, doesn't support gyro, even though 1, 2, and 3 on Switch do. So that was kind of annoying, but I did confirm later on that the gyro does work fine, and there's no problems there. But I ultimately decided after Borderlands 4, I was like, okay, let me test Fatal Fury. And I wanted to test Fatal Fury for a couple of reasons, to see how the D-pad worked, and also to check the macros. So the first thing is checking the D-pad, and yeah, the D-pad seemed to work fine. And then obviously the macros I was testing, and the macros, once I got them set up, were fine, and were actually a little bit better than the GameSir ended up being, because the macros are able to be right there on the pad itself, and you can adjust them immediately and then go back into the game and try them again, right? You don't have to go into software or anything like that. So that was quite nice. Here's where we get into the problem. So other than the kind of layout issues I described that can be a benefit or a drawback depending on, your hand size and how you grip the controller and that kind of thing, the thing I think is going to be broadly detrimental for this controller is that the input latency, especially on the sticks, is very high. There's an issue with the dongle in terms of getting it and having it receive inputs. And the problem is that it increases the stick latency to like 35 to 40 milliseconds. So if you're moving around or feeling or anything like that, it feels very slow, right? and it's actually like a noticeable input delay on sticks itself. On actual buttons, it's a little bit better. It's about 15 seconds, milliseconds, sorry, 15 milliseconds, but that is still about triple what the GameSir is, for example, and also triple what my old 8-bit Do $30 controller is, right? Which is about 5 to 7 milliseconds. So it is a bit longer, and you can start to feel that, and that combined with, I guess, how Fatal Fury kind of uses input windows and stuff, made a lot of the combos I was trying with Billy and with Kevin substantially harder, and I was like very confused because I went to Grand Blue Fantasy versus Rising. I don't think I recorded that bit, and I was testing combos there, and I'm like, no, it's working. It seems like it's working. Then I go back to Fatal Fury, and it's not working at all. I don't know if that's a specific problem or a specific quirk with how that Fatal Fury uses this stuff, but it was definitely a weird point where it just wasn't working, even though I was getting it, right? Or seemingly get it. And I think a lot of that's to do with the latency of the buttons, and especially the sticks, and a little bit of the stiffness of the D-pad there registering inputs. So I was overall satisfied with the experience, but I also knew that I had a GameSir G7 Pro 8K coming, and that I was like, okay, I'm satisfied with this, but I also want to see how this other one stacks up, right? So now we get into the GameSir One. And the GameSir One has a very similar box. In fact, if anything, it's a little bit less in terms of the box quality. It was a lot lighter, more cardboard, less kind of maintained. Had a bunch of stickies I had to remove, So overall, I don't really care about the unboxing experience, but it was a notable oddity. But the controller itself, I immediately felt better with. I'm not going to try and glaze this controller. The spoiler for the video is this is the one I ended up sticking with, but I don't want to glaze it. But I did feel immediately more at home with this controller. It felt better in the hands. The sticks felt better. The D-pad especially felt more responsive. The buttons, while still being the same mechanical switches or mechanical or optical, whatever they're called, feel like a mix between like a membrane and an optical, meaning that actually you press it down, it feels like a button. The Manba ones feel like a tick 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 tick, right, like a tick 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 kind of thing. Versus the GameSir ones, which actually feel like you're pressing down on it and it feels good, right? So there's that. The feel of the controller is great. The grips on the back really allow and accentuate just everything about it, right? It feels good there. I liked where the shoulder button placement is. It's a lot more similar to how the 8-bit Do one does it, and I like that part of that one controller, so I like it here too. The triggers are quite similar to like an Xbox controller, which I didn't have a problem with. The best thing is as with both the Manba as well, you have your two options, your linear and your clicky trigger, which is very nice, and you can set them individually, which is also very good. And then you have your back paddles, which I think are a substantial improvement from the Manba One, because they are full back paddles. There's two of them, so you're not worried about missing one or clicking the other or anything like that, and they're correctly placed. So overall, it just felt like a very good experience to hold this controller, and then I started to use it. I didn't enable 8K polling at the start, so I'm just going to say, default out-of-the-box experience, after you've downloaded the software, obviously, is a lot more responsive. Even at the normal polling rate that the Manba was doing, which is about 1K, this controller felt good. The sticks felt responsive, the D-pad felt extremely good. Playing Borderlands 4, again, trying to use the controller cam here, to showcase it. Hopefully it's in frame and visible. It felt really nice. There wasn't, again, gyro on Border 4, so I wasn't able to check that one, but the buttons felt good, the sticks were responsive, and they moved well. The D-pad was very, clicky and also responsive. Things felt like they were reacting correctly, which is always a good sign, right? On the Fatal Fury side, it was interesting because I think I did improve between the time I did it, a couple days ago and when I got the GameSir, but I also think just the D-pad and the latency not being 15 to 20 milliseconds for the buttons helped, right? The latency for the GameSir is like 5 milliseconds, I believe, with the dongle, and even less if you're wired, obviously. And that's more similar to what my 8-bit Do controller is, except the D-pad, I think, in the GameSir is much better and at least more concrete feeling mechanical than the 8-bit Do one. So that immediately felt better trying to do combos and trying to actually perform some of this stuff. It was still, a challenge because I'm not that good at the game and I'm trying things out, but it was successful. Macros were a bit harder on this controller, just because you have to go into here, assign the buttons, click on the buttons, click map 3, and then go through the thing. But ultimately, once I got them set up, they did seem to work pretty well and were replicatable, which was nice. And so it just, in the end, pretty much what it felt like was that the controller just worked better as a pure controller, as the sense of I'm using this to control what I'm doing. It felt like it worked with me better. Right? It's an inanimate object. It doesn't have moving parts in the sense that, it's not like changing actively, but it just felt like it was better designed as a controller. The Manba is an impressive piece of kit, especially for the price, but it just feels a little too like you're fighting what it was, like you're fighting its creation. You're fighting the sticks, and you're fighting especially the shoulder buttons on the D-pad, and you just don't feel like that for the GameSir. Now, this is not all praise. The major issue I have with the GameSir is that, well, it says that it's supposed to support native Switch and iOS handling. It does, but it's a lot complicated. So, pretty much, and I said this in this little clip I have here, but I'm just going to talk over it and redo it. There's a bunch of different ways you can try and pair this controller. The only way that actually works is you go to Bluetooth, you press the home button and Y, and that activates Switch mode, and then you go into the Switch thing and pair it. And if that doesn't work, which it didn't work for me originally, you have to go to the dongle, do home button Y, then switch it over to Bluetooth, home button Y, and that should work. That should pair it. There's 3 other ways to try and get to this option. Don't use them because they activate different parts of the controller for different things, and it's very confusing because none of this was explained. But basically, you can hold the start and select key to the top, and that will switch between different input recognition modes, from Switch Pro controller to X input device like Xbox controller, and then the PS4 mode. All this does is switch how Steam and how other platforms on PC recognize the controller. That's all that does. So even though it'll blink the same lights, the only thing it's actually doing is changing how it appears on your PC, right? So if you want, it to look like a Pro controller or like a PS4 controller, what have you, it'll do that, right? The other thing you do is you can press the mode button. And the mode button is, again, just like how the controls show up, I believe. It doesn't obviously change the glyphs on the controller, but it does show, versus Xbox versus, Switch and PS4, how they'll show up in the system, so it's not incorrectly configured there. You don't need to touch those, however. They work normally. It's just, convenience pretty much to make sure everything's working well. I believe all that does really is just realign the buttons, so that if you're pressing like A, it doesn't accidentally go back on Switch, I believe. I can't really think of another reason to have that mode switching buttons other than to match those things up. It is a nice feature, but again, if you don't know that's what that button does, and it's also blinking red and you're trying to pair it, it's not working yet. It's a little bit annoying. But you don't have to touch any of that. You just simply home button Y, and it'll activate the Switch mode and go into pairing, right? But other than that issue that I had, everything else was fine. As I mentioned, or as at least you can see here, it came with the dock. The dock works well. You just plug it in, put the thing on the dock. It's a bit smaller of a dock than the Manba One. I don't know if that means it charges slower, but it seems to be fine so far for me. And yeah, overall, I would say that it's just a really nice controller, good feeling controller. And between the two of them, I would ultimately recommend the GameSir One. I don't know long term how, for example, the rubber on the back of it's necessarily going to feel, because oftentimes the rubber on the back, things like the Razer mouse that I had can definitely wear down, but I'm also not using it nearly as much as 8 hours a day for the Razer mouse, right? Because it's a mouse, you got to use it for normal stuff. I think for the controller, it's probably going to last a bit longer, and I think it just fits what I want a controller to do, and it fits how I'm playing and stuff, right? And the goal, ultimately, at the start, was to get a controller that works seamlessly between PC and Switch. And this does. And this is, I think, the best controller that does that. Because all you do is switch the back from dongle to Bluetooth, click on that button, and it pairs. It activates, right? It goes from Switch to PC, PC to Switch, all that stuff, without a problem. And that was the goal, and I found the best controller to be able to do that. Now, the Manba is still a very valiant option, and it does work, especially if you want a controller that does not have to deal with external software. But I do think that more people are going to be happy with the GameSir controller than will be happy with the Manba controller. Not that the Manba's bad, it's just I think a lot more people are going to be kind of looking at the GameSir one with a higher sense of either loyalty or trust or what have you, right? Again, that's not because the Manba is bad. It's for a specific person. If you have big hands and you are, you're okay with the click of your face buttons, I think the Manba could be a great option. But as long as the GameSir G7 Pro 8K exists, I don't think the Manba really has a place in that sense. It is a little bit cheaper, obviously, so if cost is a concern, then that could be there. But I think for most people, it's worth the extra bit to get the up-to-date specs on the G7 Pro. So hopefully all this made sense. Hopefully all that was interesting and relatively compact for what we're doing here. If you like this video and want to see more of these comparison reviews on the channel, make sure to like, subscribe, do all that, and I'll see everyone in the next video.